The big question that is on many of our minds these days is, how can we help our brothers and sisters in Palestine? And one answer that we hear often is we need to partake in protests. Many Muslims are doing so. Now, I think it's important that we understand that there's a difference of opinion and that we try to get a base understanding of what the difference of opinion is. So some scholars will say, no, we shouldn't be protesting. Why? Based on what? Based on the fact that protesting is a form of humiliation. Why? Well, because essentially what they say is that this is begging disbelievers to save you, as if you put your hopes and dreams and aspirations in the salvation that America or whatever government, whatever country will bring. And you're not supposed to beg of kuffar. You're not supposed to think that disbelievers are going to save you. As a Muslim, in fact, Allah Ta'ala tells us very clearly, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إنما وليكم الله ورسوله والذين آمنوا, that indeed your ally, the one that you seek help from in these instances of, victory and battle and so forth, the one that you depend upon, your ally is who? Allah and His Messenger and the believers. That's who you're supposed to depend upon. And so this is a concern. Why do you have your hopes in a non-Muslim government going to the streets and screaming out what you want from them and hoping that they will save you? Does salvation really come from them to begin with? That's the question. And this is a weakness in aqeedah to think that that's where salvation comes from. The second reason that many scholars disagree with protesting is that they say that the Prophet ﷺ could have protested but never did. In the 13 years in which the Prophet ﷺ was a prophet in Mecca, him and the small number of believers could have easily went to the streets and chanted various slogans and described exactly their grievances and demanded justice and so on and so forth. They could have protested, and yet they never did. And so they say this is not from our deen. Now, to be fair, there is a counter argument to both of these points. As for it being a humiliation, as for the question or the issue of it being begging, then the response is that we're not begging. We are actually creating awareness and informing the non-Muslims of what's taking place because they are unaware. They should find out, they should know. And this is one way to do so. Go to the streets and let everybody know what's taking place. And that's a good thing. So it's not begging. And by the way, some people do. Maybe it is possible that some Muslims in their hearts, they're thinking, what? If we protest enough, then the government's going to save us. And so maybe it is true that people have this, you could say, incorrect, this corrupt aqeedah or creed or belief in their heart that they think salvation is going to come from such and such government. To which the response is, you need to correct that and change your intent, most definitely. But that's not the only reason. Like I said, it could be to create awareness. Another reason, another valid reason, is that you want to show your solidarity with the Muslims around the world. What does this mean? What this means is that you know that when you go and you protest, you're letting your voice be known, you're letting the world know that your heart and your prayer and your hopes and aspirations are with the Palestinian people, and you understand that they're going through suffering and that your heart goes out to them. And why do you want to make that known? Because you know it's going to be in the news. It's going to be recorded. And the rest of the world is going to see all the different cities that stood up and protested. And then the people of Palestine themselves will be able to watch, go online and take a look and see the world has not forgotten about us. The ummah has not forgotten about us. Even if they don't have the ability to physically help us, they haven't forgotten about us and they're still thinking about us. They're still making dua for us. And that gives them hope and that gives them strength and that makes them want to persist and continue on. So that's valid. There's good in that. And as for the second objection, which is that this was never done by the Prophet ﷺ, okay, that's true, but we have to differentiate between ibadat and mu'amalat. What does this mean? Ibadat are acts of worship. Mu'amalat are mundane actions, like everyday actions that you just do, just anything that you're doing in life. So, when it comes to ibadat, they have to be strictly according to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. But when it comes to mu'amalat, then you do not have to have that strict adherence to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So let me give an example of this. An example would be that you cannot invent a new form of worship. Right? You can't say, hey, guess what? I just came up with a new way of praying to God. Are you a prophet? Did Allah Ta'ala give you wahi? Did Allah reveal to you that this is what He is pleased with and this is the way He wants to be worshipped? If not, then you have no business inventing any new form of worship, a new form of salah, or a new way to make hajj, or whatever the case is. Sorry, no thank you, we're not interested in new ibadat. But when it comes to new mu'amalat, when it comes to let's say for instance, I have invented a new form of transportation. Yeah, that's perfectly fine. At the time of the Prophet ﷺ, how do they usually transport themselves? Let's say riding animals. Nowadays we use cars, planes, trains, etc., etc. There's nothing haram or bid'ah about this. To make perversions in the deen and to invent new ways of worshiping, this is called bid'ah, and this is called an innovation, or you could say a perversion of the deen, and this is completely prohibited. But when it comes to mu'amalat, mundane things, like transportation, etc., then there's nothing wrong with that. So then the question is, what about protesting? Well, protesting seems to fall generally under the category of political actions, and political actions can definitely upgrade and change with the times. Like for example, warfare. Nobody would say, hey, it's a sunnah to fight with swords and arrows and so forth, therefore that's it, we have to restrict ourselves to those. No, obviously, you're going to update, and an army is going to have guns and bombs and so on and so forth, and jets, etc. And so in that exact same way, this is a political issue, this is a political matter, and therefore there's nothing wrong with changing the methods. You don't have to be strictly adhering to the prophetic sunnah. So this is sort of the back and forth, and I think it's very important that Muslims know the back and forth between scholars and can make up their own minds, and also recognize that this is a very brief discussion on the matter. You can go a lot deeper and understand both sides a lot more, but at least you have some base understanding, inshallah. Now, personally, I genuinely hope that anybody that goes and protests, I hope inshallah ta'ala, they are rewarded for their intent. I hope they have the right intention of creating awareness. I hope they have the right intention of showing solidarity with the Muslims. And I hope that Allah Ta'ala accepts this from them, and that inshallah Ta'ala it's considered a good deed, that they're trying to do something good. I hope so. But to be perfectly honest with you, I am not convinced that is the best thing that we can be doing. I'm not. I don't believe that even if I can't prove that it's haram, and I'm not going to come with that position because I don't think it's strong to say that it's haram, that doesn't mean that I think it's the most recommended thing to do. Because I just don't think it's the most effective. Why is that the case? Because when you look at the various ahadith that describe Muslims in oppression, you get a very different idea as to how we can improve our circumstances. Let me clarify. The Prophet ﷺ described the Muslims by saying the following, the future Muslims from his time, like you could say maybe even us today, and let's see if it fits. The Prophet ﷺ says what? يُوشِكُ الْأُمَمُ أَن تَدَاعَ عَلَيْكُمْ كَمَا تَدَاعَ الْأَكَلَةُ إِلَى قَصْعَتِهَا. That the people will soon summon one another to attack you just the same way people invite each other to come and eat from a dish. Everybody wants to surround a dish and start eating together. It's like, imagine people coming and surrounding you to attack you that same way. And then he says, and then it was asked, فَقَالَ قَائِلٌ, somebody asked in the gathering, وَمِنْ قِلَّةٍ نَحْنُ يَوْمَئِذٍ, is it because we're so small in number that everybody's coming and surrounding and attacking us? The Prophet says what? بَلْ أَنْتُمْ يَوْمَئِذٍ كَثِيرٌ وَلَكِنَّكُمْ غُثَاءٌ كَغُثَاءِ السَّيْلِ. No, rather you're going to be a lot that day. And just so you know, 1 out of every 4 people on planet Earth is Muslim. That's a big number, subhanAllah. Think about that. 1 out of every 4 human beings on planet Earth is Muslim. SubhanAllah, roughly speaking. That's incredible. So will you be small in number? No, you're going to be a lot in number. But the problem is you're going to be like what? The foam on top of the sea. You know, when you go to the ocean, you see tons of waves and all sorts of riffraff and junk is rolling around in the bubbles and in the you know, you have leaves and scraps of wood and what's it called, twigs and all sorts of just junk, right? Garbage just floating around. Does anybody collect it so that they can sell it? No, because it has no worth. Is it anything firm or stable or solid? No, of course not. It's not like the rocks, or it's not like the trees that have roots. It's just driftwood, just floating around. It has no value and it has no real effect on anything. There's lots of it, but it's useless. So the Prophet ﷺ is describing that the Muslims will be like that on that day. And then this is the really, truly incredible part. The Prophet ﷺ says what? وَلَيَنْزِعَنَّ اللَّهُ مِنْ صُدُورِ عَدُوِّكُمْ الْمَهَابَةَ مِنْكُمْ. And Allah, think about this, Allah is the one who is going to remove the fear that your enemies should have of you in their hearts. Allah is going to remove that fear. So, what does this mean? That means that as a huge body of Muslims, people should be afraid to mess with the Muslims, naturally, right? These are a big, large group of people. They're brothers. They're brothers in faith and sisters in faith. They stick together. You don't want to mess with those guys. And yet, subhanAllah, when we walk away from our deen, when we're weak in our deen, when we care only about materialistic things, and we're not serious about our prayers, we're not serious about da'wah, we're not serious about the Quran, we don't come to the masjid, when we have no connection to our deen, we become weak. And it's not just that the enemy who is attacking us, that person is the problem. No. Rather, Allah Ta'ala is displeased with you, and Allah Ta'ala is the one who's saying, I am removing the fear that they have of you. The fear that they have of you, I'm removing that from their hearts. Why? Because before they would have been afraid to deal with you, to fight with you. But I want to send them as a punishment. So any sort of awe or reverence that they had, I'm going to remove that from them. Why? So they trample all over you. That's what you guys deserve. So who are you dealing with? Are you dealing with the enemy? Yes, directly, but indirectly you're actually dealing with Allah. So yes, there is the physical realm, but there's also the metaphysical realm. There's the spiritual aspect. And that's what takes place when you are neglecting your deen, that Allah Ta'ala is displeased with you and He's going to send enemies to you to trample over you until you wake up. And this is exactly what is described in this hadith. The hadith continues, وَلَيَقْذِفَنَّ اللَّهُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ الْوَهْنَ. And Allah is going to cast into your hearts wahan. What is wahan? The Prophet ﷺ was asked, what is this wahan? He says, حُبُّ الدُّنْيَا وَكَرَاهِيَةُ الْمَوْتِ. Love of this dunya and hatred of death. When you become a materialistic, when all you want to do is chase money and worldly pleasures, and when you have no consideration or preparation for the afterlife, despite knowing that death is an inevitability and it's on its way, you're neglecting it and pretending you're going to live forever. When that is your state, you become a coward. Simple. You become a coward. And when you're a coward, your enemies notice. And they come and they have no fear of you whatsoever. And they have no problem trampling all over you. Why? Because Allah Ta'ala removed any fear from their hearts, and now they want to step all over you. So who are you dealing with? Yes, there is the physical aspect, but then there is the spiritual aspect. This is how we can improve our state of the ummah. You want to help the believers? This is one way to think about it. The Prophet says in another hadith, إِذَا تَبَايَعْتُمْ بِالْعِينَةِ. When you engage in transactions that are ina. What is an ina transaction? It's a type of transaction that is riba based. It is based on riba, interest, but there's a hila, there's a trick. There is some sort of a way of covering it up or pretending that it's halal. So sometimes people do this. They try to sell something in a way where they try to hide the fact that they're dealing with interest, and they try to give it a nice, pretty sort of covering, but deep down everybody knows that this is haram. So when you deal with these type of riba transactions that you just give a fancy name to it, when you know it's haram. And then what? وَأَخَذْتُمْ أَذْنَابَ الْبَقَرِ. And when you are holding on to the tails of your cattle or your cows or whatever the case is. وَرَضِيتُمْ بِالزَّرْعِ. And you are very pleased with your agriculture, cultivation, your farming. Now, is it wrong to be a farmer? Is it wrong to have cattle? No. But holding on to the tails, what does it imply? You're obsessed with it. That this is your only focus in life. It's not wrong to be successful in life, but it's wrong if this is your highest aspiration. And then the hadith goes on to even prove this point even more. وَتَرَكْتُمُ الْجِهَادِ. And you have abandoned striving in Allah's cause. You don't strive for the sake of Allah at all. You're only worried about dunya. When this is your state, what's going to happen? سَلَّتَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكُمْ ذُلًّا. Then Allah Ta'ala will cause humiliation and disgrace to prevail over top of you. You'll be covered with this humiliation and disgrace. لا ينزعه حتى ترجعوا إلى دينكم. And it will not go away. He will not remove it until you return back to your deen. Until yes, you can collect, you can work hard and make money and so on and so forth, but that should not be your top priority. Your top priority should be what? Striving for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and establishing this deen. This is what I believe we should be doing generally. And I don't think anybody who has abandoned their deen and is only culturally, nominally Muslim, and says to themselves, oh, well, I'm going to show support by going downtown and yelling slogans and so on and so forth and yell at the buildings and pat themselves on the back, even though they've abandoned the Quran, they've abandoned their salah, they're not practicing their deen, they never come to the masjid. Oh, but don't worry, I went downtown and I yelled a lot. I'm sorry, you're not helping anything. You're only deceiving yourself. Maybe you're making yourself feel good. Maybe you're patting yourself on the back, making yourself feel like, I did something today. Sorry, not really. So, again, I'm not discouraging those who want to go to protest. I think that there is some good that can come from it, inshallah, if you have the right intent. I'm not discouraging it, but I don't think it's the most important thing. And I definitely think we should be focused on our deen generally. What is the specific thing that we can do to help the cause, those who are being oppressed in Palestine? Inshallah, I'll continue in the second khutbah. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam kathira. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. What can we do more specifically to help those who are being oppressed these days? I think it's very important to recognize how unique of a position we have. First of all, we're a minority. We are about 1 or 2% of the United States as Muslims. And furthermore, when it comes to the ummah, there's about 2 billion Muslims on planet Earth, roughly. And we represent, in America, the Muslims of America represent something like 0.15, roughly, % of all Muslims on Earth. So we're a very, very, very small, we represent a very small portion of the Muslim ummah. There are full countries overseas that are Muslim. The whole government, the whole army, the natural resources, all the scholars, all the geniuses, they have what they need. They're not waiting around for the Americans to come save the day, the American Muslims to come change their situation. So we need to be a little bit more realistic as to what our role is. What do they expect from us? And how can we contribute to their cause? Well, I do think that we have a very unique position. We know the language, we know the culture in this part of the world. We have neighbors, we have coworkers, classmates, and friends. We are professionals and we have respectable reputations in our given field. When we talk, people listen. We should recognize that there's a lot of people in the Muslim world, they don't have an audience here. They don't have the ability to communicate like we do. They can't get their message out, but we can. We can express our political views, we can express our religious views. We can destigmatize Islam to the non-Muslim majority. We can familiarize them with our beliefs, whether it be politically, whether it be religiously. Ultimately, if they become familiar enough, they can convert. This is an extremely unique position that we have. And I think that is what the Muslim Ummah wants from us and wants us to do. I think that's a little bit more effective than just going downtown and yelling and so on and so forth. And so how do we do this? Well, just this Monday, I had a meeting with a leader of one of the churches. And it was a very beautiful conversation that we had. And I had several questions for him. And I encourage all of us to think about this. Maybe you can do this too. Nothing's holding you back from going and having these conversations. You know how anybody can just walk into the masjid, the doors are wide open? And sometimes Christians do come in here and they have questions, they want to ask about Islam. You can do the same thing. You can go to the church. You can attend their Sunday service, listen, pay close attention, and then at the end of it say, I have some questions. I'm a Muslim, and I thought it was a very interesting service. It's very nice. Thank you for, having your doors open. I'm so glad to be here. It's a very nice service that you have, and I have some questions. Can I talk to your pastor? Can I talk to your leader? I have some questions to ask. I'm representing Masjid Al-Huda, I would love to talk to you, and maybe one day you can come visit us. Why are we afraid to do this? What's holding us back? Nothing. But what are we going to ask? Well, let me tell you what I asked. My question was this. You believe that God showed up on earth, right? That's what you believe. That the most important event in all of human history was God showing up on earth as a human being, right? That's what you guys believe as Christians? And yeah, the answer was yes. I go, okay, good. And he could have chosen to be born anywhere. He could have been born in Brazil. He could have been born in China. He could have been born anywhere. What is the significance of him being born in the West Bank? Bethlehem, right? Isa alayhi salam was born in Bethlehem. What is the significance of the fact that he was essentially a Palestinian? And how do you feel about the fact that as Christians, a very common theme in your religion is what? A very common theme is that those who are the most oppressed are usually the most innocent. Right? That's what they believe. They believe Jesus being the most innocent, he was the most oppressed, he took the worst punishment. Okay, if that's a major theme, and there's so many early stories of the early martyrs of Christianity and so forth, if this is a major theme in your religion, and he was from the West Bank, and he was born as a child, then what do you tell me about the children What do you say about the Palestinian children that are being killed today? What's your opinion? And furthermore, what do you tell your congregation when they're watching the news and they have questions about this? You as a leader, how do you lead them? How do you navigate them? How do you explain to them how to understand what's taking place? I want to know. Is there any significance in your religion? Let's take it even further. When did this fighting start? One of the things that started all this up was the fact that Muslims were praying during the month of Ramadan, were they not? They were praying in Masjid Al-Aqsa. It wasn't like the Israeli government wasn't aware of what was happening. It's not like they were shocked, like, oh my God, people are praying during Ramadan. They know about Ramadan, they know about Salah, they know about all this stuff. Nothing new. It's been happening for over 1,000 years. And yet, they started acting like they were threatened. Please explain to me what was threatening to you. When they were in ruku'? When they were in sujood? Why? Why would you shoot at somebody who's praying? So, furthermore, question for you. You believe and you know that Jesus ﷺ, was from the same place. And he also worshiped the same God. They know that it's written in their Bible that he used to pray to God. He was from the same place, praying to the same one, all-powerful, unseen creator, was he not? And it wasn't just that he was from the same place and praying to the same God, but in addition to that, you find in your Bible, incredibly, that he prayed in the same way. What were the Muslims doing? Prostrating themselves. What do we do in Jum'ah? We go into sajda and prostrate. And you might attend a church service, and you might notice that they don't really do that. So ask the question. I didn't see you guys bowing down, prostrating. And yet, I find in the Gospel of Mark 14:35 that he fell to the ground and prayed. We fall to the ground and pray. Apparently Jesus did. Apparently the people where Jesus was from, in Palestine, they do the exact same thing. And they were getting killed for it. What do you think about that? Luke 22:41, that he knelt down, falling to his knees. We go down on our knees as well. In the Gospel of Matthew 26:39, perhaps the most explicit, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed. Explicit description of sajda, with his face to the ground. So what do you think about the fact that in that exact same place, praying to the same God, the same people, in the same way, that's taking place today? What do you say, and how do you guide your flock? How do you guide your congregation? How do you tell them to navigate this, and what do you think about this? And perhaps most importantly, what do you have to say about the fact that our government is giving somewhere between $3 to $4 billion annually in foreign aid to the Israeli government? $3 or $4 billion a year to support this, somewhere between there. Every single year to support this oppression. Keep in mind, there's only about 9 million people in all of Israel. So you do the numbers. How much is that for each individual? It's incredible. What do you have to say about this? I think that the Muslims of the rest of the world, they would appreciate if we were to go and have that conversation more than if we just go on the streets and yell. And when I had this conversation with a church leader, I could tell it had an impact on him. And he said, you know what, you're right. I haven't researched this issue enough. And yes, you're right that my congregation does need to learn about this. And you're right, we should be some more supportive. And you're right that this is a very significant time. And whatever we can do to help, you let us know. And we would love to communicate and create links and bonds with your community in this difficult time. He showed a lot of support. And I think to myself, can I individually go to every single church? No, not necessarily. But do we have lots of elders from our community who have been here for a very long time, who are well established, who have good reputations in their community, they're professionals in their own field? They've been part of this masjid for a long time. They've helped build this new masjid. What's wrong? Who's holding you back? Nobody needs to hold your hand. Nobody needs to hold your hand and say, okay, let's go to the church and have this conversation. You're a grown man. You can do it all by yourself. You can say, you know what? This Sunday, I'm going to go. I'm going to attend. I'll listen. I'll be respectful. And then I'll say, may I please have a conversation with the pastor? I have some questions. I'd like to know his position on this. I think the Muslims of the whole world would appreciate that a lot more than these other type of actions. This is the unique position that we have. Brothers and sisters, don't belittle it. Don't ignore our ability to reach out and have these conversations. I think that's what we need to do if we want to support our brothers and sisters around the world. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of those who stand up against oppression. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us be of those who stand up for that which is true and that which is right. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of those who are not afraid to have these sometimes difficult, sometimes awkward conversations, but are necessary, these necessary conversations. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of those who can build bridges with our neighbors. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Jazakumullahu khairan. اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن توليت وبارك لنا فيما أعطيت وقنا شر ما قضيت فإنك تقضي ولا يقضى عليك إنه لا يذل من واليت ولا يعز من عاديت تباركت ربنا وتعاليت ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا وأقم الصلاة.